Why was the smallest figure on the parade ground drawing the loudest laughter? Sophia Chun stood there, boots planted in the dust of Fort Bragg's elite sniper school, her oversized duffel bag nearly toppling her slight frame. Around her, the air was thick with the presence of towering, battle-hardened soldiers, men who wore the weight of combat on their shoulders like an extra layer of armor. Jake Morrison, a 6'3" Marine with arms like tree trunks and a chest stacked with ribbons, smirked at her like she was a punchline waiting to happen. "They sent us a lost college student?" His voice carried across the yard, and the ripple of laughter that followed seemed to gather strength as it spread. Sophia didn't answer. She adjusted her grip on the duffel and took another step forward, but when she tried to hoist it over her shoulder, the weight pulled her sideways. It wasn't just the bag. Everything about this place felt heavier than she'd imagined. Rodriguez, a grizzled Army Ranger whose arms bore a lattice of scars, called out, "Hey, Tinkerbell, you sure you're in the right place?" Girl Scout camp's 50 miles that way. More laughter. At the equipment check, it only got worse. The Barrett rifle, 30 pounds of steel and recoil, looked absurd in her hands, like a child borrowing. Her father's tools, Sergeant Williams, 20 years of combat behind him, and a voice as sharp as broken glass, shook his head. "This isn't summer camp, princess. We don't babysit here." Phones appeared, the grins widened. By lunch, a betting pool was in motion. Morrison collected bills from eager hands 3 days before she cracked, maybe a week. If she was stubborn, no one, not a single person, thought she'd survive the first field exercise. "She's a math genius," someone whispered. "Scored perfect on all the written exams," Morrison snorted. "Math won't save you when you're lying in a swamp for 18 hours waiting for a shot." They avoided her in the mess hall. Their voices carried just far enough for her to hear diversity quotas, political strings. Some general's daughter on a PR stunt. She probably thinks this is like those video games. Patterson, an Air Force combat controller, said between bites, "Wait till she finds out there's no respawn button." She didn't respond. She ate alone. She kept her eyes on her tray, but she filed away every word. When her turn came at the 500-meter range, the air shifted. The rifle that had seemed so unwieldy in her arms suddenly aligned with her body like it belonged there. She dropped prone in one fluid motion, her breathing settling into an even, steady rhythm. Through the scope, the target was just a speck, barely visible against the paper's faded rings. The crosswind was tricky flags flicking in inconsistent directions, but Sophia adjusted her scope in small, precise movements, no wasted motion. The first shot cracked through the silence. Dead center, the range officer confirmed it. Binoculars still pressed to his face. A second shot, another perfect hit, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. The laughter stopped. Morrison's grin faltered. Rodriguez muttered something about beginners luck, but even his voice had lost some of its edge. That night, the whispers were different. No more jokes, just curiosity. Thompson, a Navy SEAL, spoke quietly to his bunkmate. "I'd been shooting for 15 years. I couldn't group that tight on my best day." Morrison tried to push back, but there was something in his tone. Now hesitation. Sophia lay in the dark, listening. She wasn't here to win their approval, but she could feel the odds shifting. They had bet on her failure. She had just made them reconsider the game entirely. She had felt the change in the air after that first qualification. Not acceptance, not yet, but something quieter. Caution. As if the men who'd laughed at her that morning had caught a glimpse of something they couldn't quite name. It didn't matter. Respect here wasn't earned in a day. The following week, the range became her proving ground. Day after day, she broke records in silence. While others tapped on ballistics apps or argued with spotters, Sophia ran every calculation in her head. Wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, the subtle shift of air as the earth warmed beneath the sun. She absorbed it all without writing a single number down. She made it look effortless, but behind the calm, Her mind was a storm of precision. On the 800-meter range, swirling winds chewed up even the best shooters' groups. Rounds drifted inches, then feet from center mass. An instructor named Davis stood over her shoulder, watching as she lay prone in the grass, scanning the movement of distant stalks. "What's your wind call?" he asked, testing her. "Northwest. 12 knots, gusting to 15. Vertical component 2/10 from a thermal updraft," she said without hesitation. He checked his meter. His jaw tightened. "Within half a knot?" he muttered. "Almost." To himself, word traveled. Morrison, once her loudest heckler, began watching her from a few feet away instead of the far corner of the line. He studied her breathing pattern, her stillness, the way she seemed to vanish into the rifle. He had never seen anyone settle into a shot so fast. "She doesn't just shoot," Davis told Sergeant Williams later. "She becomes part of the rifle." Williams had no answer for that, but when her performance reports landed on his desk, he didn't throw them into the pile. He read every line. Then came the crucible. 72 hours of high-position surveillance on a mock enemy compound. Sleep deprivation, hunger, exposure, the kind of exercise that stripped even seasoned operators to their limits. By hour 18, Rodriguez was blinking himself awake. By hour 36, Thompson had been compromised after nodding off in his hide. By hour 48, Morrison had missed his shot, entirely exhaustion stealing his focus in the second it mattered most. One by one, the elite fell away, but Sophia remained in her hide. The world outside her rifle scope was a slow, deliberate blur. Her ghillie suit blended into the vegetation so well that even thermal sweeps struggled to pick her up. At hour 68, the target emerged. 43 seconds of visibility. Her shot broke clean and silent 847 meters. Center mass. "How the hell is she even awake?" Morrison whispered, still not quite believing it. Davis shook his head. "She doesn't burn energy like we do. She drops into something. I don't know, meditative. Her heart rate's probably been under 60 this entire time. From that moment, they called her the Ghost. In urban warfare drills, she would disappear in plain sight, inside a ventilation duct, behind a sliver of shadow on a rooftop, and a knot of debris that somehow became her. She waited hours for perfect windows, then struck with precision that felt almost unfair. Her reputation didn't stop at the sniper school gates, special operations. Instructors came to watch her work. A Navy SEAL with 30 years in the craft stood silently after seeing her land consecutive shots in shifting winds. Then said to Williams, "She's not just gifted. She's rewriting the rulebook." The old betting pool about her failure was dead. Morrison started a new one. The question now wasn't if she'd break the military's longest confirmed kill it. Was when, by the third month, she wasn't just topping records, she was annihilating them. At 1,000 meters, her groups were tighter than most experts could manage at 300. She hadn't missed a single round in 847 shots. Rodriguez, once her sharpest critic, now followed her lead, asking for her advice on wind calls. Thompson asked her to explain a ballistic model he'd been struggling to grasp. She made it simple, and then Williams, the same man who'd called her princess on day one, stopped her after a drill. "Chun," he said, voice low, almost grudging. "I've trained snipers for 2 decades, seen naturals, seen hard workers. What you have, it's something else. You're not just going to be good. You're going to be remembered." She didn't smile, didn't thank him, just nodded once, because there was nothing to say. And then, at 3:47 one morning, the satellite phone rang. Captain Reynolds answered. His expression didn't change as he listened, grim efficiency born of too many calls that meant life or death. Colonel Martinez's voice crackled through the speaker. "We've got him. Halil Hassan, butcher of Kabul, Kandahar, Jalalabad. 347 children dead. He's been a ghost for 8 months. Now he's in a fortified compound in the Hindu Kush. Balcony at dawn, 90-second window. The room gathered around the map. The location was worse than bad a cliff fortress. Vertical stone layers of security. The only possible firing position was across the valley. Distance, 2,796 meters. The silence was immediate and heavy. Rodriguez spoke first. "Sir, that's beyond the effective range of anything we've got. The bullet drop alone 30 feet, wind shifting every few hundred meters. It's not just hard, it's impossible." Morrison ran the numbers on his ballistic calculator. 9 seconds of flight time. In that span, the wind could change. The target could move. Pressure could shift. Margin for error is 0, he said flatly. No one had an answer. No one except her. "I can make that shot." Heads turned, not in amusement this time. In disbelief, Rodriguez tried to reason. "With her, Sophia? This isn't the range. This is nearly 3 times the distance of the longest confirmed kill in history." Morrison leaned closer, his voice softer now. "If you miss, he's gone forever. Hundreds more could die. You don't get a second try." She didn't blink. "I've been running the numbers since the colonel started talking. Mountain winds follow thermal cycles. Temperature differentials create predictable patterns. I can account for it all." Reynolds studied her, weighing the choice. "Sophia, the record is 2,475 meters. You'd be going 300 meters past it." "I understand," she said. "Give me 12 hours to study the conditions. I can make this shot." The debate was tense, personal. Some argued it would destroy her career. If she failed, others knew there was no other option. Wait for a better opportunity. And they might wait forever. Martinez's voice cut through the noise. "Chun, on a scale of 1 to 10, your confidence level?" She thought for a moment. 8.5. The number hung in the air like a trigger half pulled. And just like that, the mission was hers. Even her doubters didn't say it out loud. But for the first time, they wanted her to be right. The mountain was still in shadow when she took her position. A thin, cold wind scraped across the ledge, carrying the scent of stone and distant snow. At 5:47 hours, Sophia lay prone on a slab of rock barely wide enough to hold her body. Behind her, a sheer drop plunged 300 feet into a maze of jagged cliffs. In front of her, across a yawning valley, the target balcony was a postage stamp of concrete carved into the cliffside. She'd been there for more than 4 hours already. Waiting, studying, breathing, the Barrett MRAD lay flush against her shoulder. Its bipod locked into the stone like a living extension of her body. Every screw, every edge of the weapon had been checked and rechecked until there was no space left. For doubt, Morrison was beside her, optics trained on the compound. The transformation between them was complete once her loudest detractor. Now her voice of calm data. "Wind's variable," he whispered. 8 knots northwest on the valley floor. Mid-levels and mess-up drafts every 30 seconds. She nodded slightly. Eyes still fixed on the balcony. These mountains were a ballistic nightmare, air currents stacked in layers, each fighting the next. A lesser shooter would be guessing by now, but Sophia didn't guess. She saw the wind in the sway of branches, in the shimmer of heat climbing off rock, in the way dust lifted and fell. Her heart rate was steady at 42 beats per minute. Her breathing was slow, almost imperceptible in her mind. The bullet was already in motion, arcing over the valley. Each factor accounted for before she ever touched the trigger. Morrison read off more data. Pressure, 24.8. Temp diff 12 degrees between here and target. Humidity climbing. Mirage forming. She adjusted windage half. A minute to compensate for the shift. Every movement was small, deliberate, through the scope. The compound was waking up. Guards in mismatched uniforms shifted at the perimeter. A glint of glass betrayed another sniper's scope sweeping the horizon. The place was a fortress, but the balcony, just 90 seconds of vulnerability, was the single crack in the wall. Movement, Morrison breathed. 4. No 5 figures approaching, Hassan's the tall one, center. And there he was. Halal Hassan, bearded, white robes, moving with the confidence of a man convinced he was untouchable. Sophia's world narrowed to the crosshairs and the slow, rhythmic pulse in her ears. "You have the shot," Morrison whispered. She found her respiratory pause. The world went still. Every calculation locked into place. The wind shift at mid-flight, the 4-story bullet drop, the Earth's rotation dragging the round inches off course over nearly 3 kilometers. The trigger broke clean, a perfect straight bat pull. The rifle roared, muzzle brake spitting dust into the thin air, recoil pushed into her shoulder, but her sight picture barely shifted for 87 seconds. The round cut through space at over 2,800 feet per second. Across the valley, Hassan turned slightly, mid-sentence impact. His head snapped back. The white robes collapsed in a heap against the balcony's concrete. The security detail erupted into chaos. Shouts bounced off the cliffs, guards scrambled, searching for a shooter they would never find. "Jesus Christ," Morrison said softly, lowering his scope. "That's not just the record. That's impossible made real." The radio crackled a moment later. "Target down. Repeat, target is down. Mission accomplished." Below them, the compound fractured into disarray, vehicles tearing out of gates. The structure unraveling without its center. Above, the wind kept moving, unconcerned, carrying away the smoke from her shot. Morrison began packing his gear, glancing at her like he was seeing something new. "You know what this means, right? They'll be telling this story for 100 years. Sophia didn't answer. She just broke the rifle down piece by piece, the way she always did. But as they began their descent from the mountain, she allowed herself the smallest smile. The girl they'd once called Tinkerbell had just changed the limits of what human beings believed possible. Back at the forward operating base, the air felt different. Not lighter. There was no such thing after a kill like this, but charged, as if the compound electricity from the Hindu Kush had followed them back. Word had traveled fast before Sophia had even stepped through the door of the operations tent. Operators from other teams were looking up from their work, eyes following her. Some nodded with the quiet acknowledgement reserved for those who'd done the impossible. Others just stared, as if they were trying to reconcile the image of the small, quiet woman in dusty fatigues with the whispered reports now racing through the chain of command. The official confirmation came in the form of a coded message, logged and time-stamped for history. Target down. Halal Hassan distance, 2,796 meters. It didn't read like a legend. It read like a fact. That was what made it so unsettling by evening. The details had already begun to warp in the retelling. Some said the wind had shifted 3 times mid-flight, and she'd still compensated. Others swore the target was already moving when she pulled the trigger. The truth was in the logs, but truth had never been enough for stories like this. Morrison kept close, packing her gear onto the steel table with the same care she'd used. On the mountain, "You're going to hate this part," he said quietly. "What part?" "The part where they turn you into a myth." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She'd been in the military long enough to know how quickly feats became legends, and how easily legends turned into burdens. By nightfall, high-ranking officers were already coming through the fob to shake her hand. Some had fought their whole careers in shadows, never earning a name outside their unit. Now here was this quiet sniper no-combat ribbons across her chest. No war stories spilling out of her mouth, being spoken of in the same breath as the most celebrated warriors in history. A brigadier general paused in front of her bunk, offering a slow nod. "They'll study that shot for decades, Sergeant." "Chun, I just did my job, sir." His smile was faint, but his eyes told her he didn't believe that for a second. In the days that followed, analysts pulled every scrap of data from the mission. Wind speed recordings, temperature gradients, humidity, topography, even the Coriolis effect. They reconstructed the shot in simulations and watched as the models failed again and again to produce the same outcome. Statistically, one major said during a briefing, that bullet shouldn't have hit, and yet it had. The shot became a teaching tool, a cautionary example, a recruitment pitch. To some, it was proof that the human factor could never be fully measured to others. It was an anomaly, something to marvel at, but never expect again. Sophia avoided most of the noise. She trained, maintained her gear, and worked her assignments. But the attention had a way of following her. It showed in the way strangers addressed her now, as if they already knew her story before she'd said a word. It showed in the way young recruits lingered on the range, watching from the corners, hoping to see something they could steal for themselves. Rodriguez found her one evening, sitting alone in the motor pool. "You ever think about how far that shot's gonna travel?" he asked. She looked at him, unsure if he meant the bullet or the story. "Not really," she said. "Maybe you should, stuff like that. It doesn't fade. Every time someone tells it, you'll be in it. Doesn't matter if they get the details. Wrong, you'll still be there." She thought about that long after he left, about how the wind she'd read on that mountain would now blow through conversations she'd never hear, in rooms she'd never enter. Weeks later, the official commendation came, a quiet ceremony. No reporters, no public announcement, just her unit, the brass, and a piece of paper acknowledging that she had accomplished what the military had once considered impossible. When it was over, she folded the document into her duffel without ceremony. She didn't frame it, didn't pin it to a wall, because somewhere deep down, she knew what mattered wasn't that she'd made the shot. It was that she'd been ready when the moment came, ready after the laughter, after the bets, after every doubt cast her way. And as much as people wanted to talk about ballistics and records, the truth was simpler. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The first time she returned to the range after the shot, the air was wrong. An air was wrong. Not the wind. She knew the wind like she knew her own heartbeat, but the way people moved around her. Before, shooters had filled the benches, talking over one another, swapping insults, jostling for the next turn on the line. Now there was space where she stood. Conversations dropped in volume when she walked past. The sound of brass hitting the concrete floor seemed louder than the voices. It wasn't reverence, not exactly. It was something heavier. She lay prone, lined up on the 1,000-meter target, and for the first time in months, felt eyes on her. Not just Morrison's or an instructor's, everyone's. They weren't watching to see if she could shoot. They were watching to see if the legend would hold. The shot broke clean. Center hit. Of course it did. But the silence that followed was different from the silence on the mountain. This wasn't disbelief. This was confirmation. Rodriguez approached after, hands in his pockets. "You realize you've messed with people's heads, right? How so?" "They came here thinking there's a ceiling to what's possible. Then you smashed through it. Now they've got to figure out what that means for them." She didn't reply. She didn't want to tell him that ceilings never felt real to her. Not because she thought she could break them, but because she never let herself look for them. The missions kept coming. Different terrain, different objectives, but in every briefing, she caught the sidelong glances when distances were discussed or when the wind charts went up on the screen, as if someone was waiting for her to say she could do it again. She didn't, not because she doubted herself, but because she knew the cost of carrying an expectation like that into the field. Morrison saw it. One night, in the dim light of the barracks, he said, "You know, you don't have to live up to that shot every time you pull the trigger." "I'm not trying to," she said. He studied her for a moment. "Good, because people will try to turn you into a trophy, and trophies don't last long in this line of work." Still, the story grew. She overheard two new recruits in the FOS chow line arguing about whether the bullet had dropped 30 feet or 35. Someone claimed she'd made the win call without even looking through her scope. She didn't correct them. She thought about her grandfather, who'd been a decorated marksman in a war she barely remembered from childhood. He'd once told her, "The moment you start believing your own legend is the moment you stop earning it." So she kept working quietly, methodically, breaking down rifles until her hands were black with grease, running calculations in her head until numbers felt like a second language. There were nights when she'd wake before dawn and feel the echo of the Hindu Kush in her bones, the ledge beneath her, the thin air in her lungs, the weight of knowing one shot would change everything. It wasn't pride she felt in those moments. It was something closer to gravity. One rainy afternoon, between training cycles, she sat in the corner of the mess hall, notebook open, sketching wind charts. A corporal she didn't know approached her table, hovering awkwardly. "Ma'am." "Sorry, Sergeant Chun, He stopped, swallowed, started again. "How did you know you could make that shot?" She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "I didn't. I just knew I could not take it." He left without another word, but his face stayed with her, because she understood something now. The legend wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to anyone who needed to believe that some things, no matter how impossible they looked, were still worth attempting. And that, she realized, was heavier than the rifle had ever been. It started small, a mission briefing where her name was penciled in beside primary shooter before anyone else's qualifications were discussed. A call from a commander she'd never met, asking for her by name, an operations plan rewritten to account for the possibility of another extreme distance shot. On paper, it was a compliment. In practice, it was something else, an invisible wall going up between her and the rest of the team. Morrison noticed first. "They're planning around you now," he said after one briefing, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry. "Not with you, around you." She knew what he meant in this line of work. Being the outlier was dangerous. It changed the way people looked at you. It changed what they expected. Rodriguez put it bluntly over coffee one morning. "You're not a sniper anymore, Chun. You're the sniper. There's a difference." At first, she brushed it off. She still did the same training, still hauled the same gear, still lay prone in the same mud as everyone else. But slowly she began to feel the shift in planning meetings. Questions meant for the team started landing on her alone, in the field. She could sense the subtle pause in conversation when she offered input, as if her words carried a weight no one else's did. That kind of weight was dangerous. The next operation took them into a narrow valley with thick vegetation, the kind of terrain where a shot over 600 meters was unlikely. Still, she was placed on overwatch while the rest of the unit pushed in. Through her scope, she saw movement, 2 hostiles flanking toward Morrison's position. The shot was clean, but short by her usual standards. She took it without hesitation. 2 down, team safe. When they regrouped, one of the newer soldiers grinned at her. 250 meters? That's nothing for you, right?" She didn't answer. She just kept walking. But later that night, she thought about his tone. The way it wasn't admiration so much as disbelief that she would be used for anything less than a miracle. And that was the trap. The legend had stopped being about skill. It had become about spectacle. She saw it in training too. The younger snipers didn't just want to hit their targets. They wanted to replicate the shot. They'd ask about her calculations, her breathing, her scope adjustments. But their eyes would glaze over when she talked about the hours of observation, the patience, the discipline. They didn't want the process, they wanted the moment. One evening, after the range had gone quiet, Morrison stayed behind with her. He didn't say anything for a while, just lay beside her on the mat, watching the last of the light fade over the targets. "You ever wish you'd missed?" he asked finally. The question hung in the air between them. "No," she said, "but I wish people understood that I could have." He nodded slowly. "That's the part they'll never put in the story." By now, the shot had filtered into places she would never see: training manuals, recruitment speeches, late-night conversations in faraway bases. And in every version, she could feel pieces of the truth slipping away. She still trained, still worked the fundamentals, still treated every mission like it could be the one that mattered most. But in the back of her mind, she knew something had changed forever. Because when a legend walks into the room, people stop looking for the soldier, and sometimes that's the most dangerous thing of all. The call came just after midnight. Not frantic calls like that, never were, but clipped. Deliberate. The tone that told her someone had already decided she was the solution before she'd even been told the problem. By 1:30, she was sitting in the operations tent, map spread in front of her. The target wasn't far, maybe 900 meters out. But the terrain was brutal, dense urban sprawl choked with blind corners and intersecting lines of fire. It should have been a multi-shooter assignment, each position covering another. But the commander leaned over the map and tapped a single rooftop. "This is you, Chun." She scanned the overlay. "That's an exposed position, no concealment, no secondary exit." "That's why it'll work," he said. "They won't expect anyone to take it." Morrison, across the table, shifted in his chair. "Sir, we can set up an alternate, 2 positions, overlapping fields, reduce the risk. Risk is acceptable." The commander cut in. His eyes landed on Sophia. "We need your shot on this." The room was quiet for a long moment. It wasn't a request. By dawn, she was on the rooftop. The city still half asleep below. Her rifle rested against the lip of the wall. Scope already scanning for the target. A courier moving with encrypted intel. The window for engagement would be seconds, fast, clean, and unforgiving. Through the glass of her optics, she saw him appear at the far end of the street. No rush in his pace. No sign he knew death was watching from above. But then something shifted in her peripheral vision. 2 children on a balcony, maybe 20 meters behind the target, hanging laundry in the thin morning light. The legend in her head. The one other people had built told her the shot was still possible. Adjust the angle, thread the bullet, take the man before he turned the corner. The soldier in her knew better. She eased her finger from the trigger and keyed the radio. Target not clear. Stand by. Static. Then the commander's voice. "Tight. Chun, you have the window." She kept her voice level. "Collateral risk is unacceptable." Waiting for separation. A pause. "Negative. Take the shot." Morrison's voice cut in on a secondary channel. "You call, Sophia." The courier disappeared into an alley, and with him, the mission's objective. She lowered the rifle, breaking the sight picture. The decision was made. Minutes later, boots pounded up the stairwell. The commander's face was ashen with anger. "Do you have any idea?" "Yes, sir," she said, packing her rifle. "I do. Back at the FOB." She filed her after-action report without embellishment. Engagement withheld due to presence of non-combatants within probable impact zone. There were no commendations this time. No quiet nods from brass. Just a mission marked incomplete. But that night, sitting alone, she felt no regret. Because she understood something the legend never would: precision wasn't just about hitting the smallest possible target. It was about knowing when not to pull the trigger. The range was quiet when she returned weeks later. No drills. No instructors pacing behind the line. Just the distant hum of wind moving through the trees. She lay prone on the mat. Barrett stretched out in front of her. The target was a simple steel plate at 500 meters, a distance that felt almost intimate compared to the mountain or the city rooftop. She fired once. The sharp ring of impact echoed across the empty field. It wasn't practice, it wasn't a test. It was just a reminder to herself more than anyone else that the rifle, the math, the patience, they were still hers. Morrison joined her halfway through the box of ammunition. He didn't say anything at first, just sat up beside her and sent a round downrange. "They're still talking about it, you know," he said after a while. "The shot, the miss, all of it. They always will," she replied. He glanced at her. "Doesn't bother you?" She let the next breath settle into her bones before answering. "Only when they think the shot is all I am." He nodded, and for a long time they just lay there, taking turns on the trigger, brass piling up between them. The truth was, the legend had a life of its own now. It would keep growing, reshaping itself in the mouths of people who weren't there, turning her into whatever they needed her to be. Proof. Inspiration, myth. But none of that changed what she knew deep down, that every perfect shot, every impossible distance, every story worth telling came down to the same thing: quiet choices made in moments no one else would ever see. Long after Morrison left, she stayed on the mat, eyes closed, feeling the weight of the rifle under her hands. Somewhere out there, another mission would come. Another set of eyes would look to her when the margin for error was zero. And when that moment arrived, she would do what she had always done: measure the wind, watch the light, weigh the risk, and only then decide. Because the legend might be about the distance, but the truth was always about the discipline. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.